The British Massacre was a deadly riot that occurred on March 5, 1770. More than 2,000 British soldiers occupied the city of 16,000 colonists and tried to enforce the British tax laws. The conflict energized anti-British sentiment and paved the way for the American Revolution.
The Stamp Act was made by the British to pay for the French and Indian War. The British felt that imposing the taxes upon the American colonies was justified, since the colonies were benefiting from their troops. The American colonists did not take this well, believing the only people allowed to tax them was their own legislature, leading to no taxation without representation.
The birth of Peter Salem in 1750 is celebrated on this day. Salem first served in the Massachusetts militia and then later in the Continental Army. Salem was credited with the shot that killed British Major John Pitcairn. After the war, Salem built a cabin near Leicester, Massachusetts, and worked as a cane weaver. He died in Framingham poorhouse in 1816.
The Treaty of Paris was a letter signed in 1783 by King George III and representatives of the USA. This letter ended the American Revolution between Great Britain and the Americans. In the treaty, it was stating France gave up all of their territory to North America, which ended the military threat to the British colonies.
Today we will be talking about the American Revolution, loyalty, and freedom. African Americans were all on the American side, but when the European promised them freedom for their loyalty, the African Americans started changing sides based on who they thought would win.
The Americans were very reluctant as to adding African Americans, both enslaved and free, to their army. This mostly derived based off of their fear of a revolt. Because arming the people they treated so badly, it's possible for them to have thought that they're able to revolt now that they have weapons. And in addition to fear, they also must have felt pain when they were working with the men and women that they treated so harshly.
William Lee arrived at Mount Vernon in 1768 when George Washington purchased him from a wealthy Virginia widow. From there, he started to be his personal aide. He would be in control of his papers, even hold his spyglass. When the retired president died, William Lee was the only free slave who was immediately freed from his will.
Crispus Attucks was an important part to the American Revolution. He was a black patriot that served the American Revolution. On March 5, 1770, he was the first black to be killed in the Boston Massacre during the American Revolution.
James Armstead Lafayette was an enslaved African American who served in the Continental Army during the American Revolution. He was a double agent, pretending to spy for the British, but really spying on the British. By doing this, he allowed America to be one step ahead.
In addition to participating as soldiers for both sides of the American Revolution, African Americans contributed through other means. For instance, African Americans who weren't in the front line served as cooks, waiters, guides, and many more roles. As spies, they managed to give the colonies advantage to their information. Ultimately, not all African American war heroes were in the line of fire, but rather contributed as supporting roles throughout the war.
In December 1777, General George Washington moved the Continental Army to the winter quarters at Valley Forge. The Revolutionary forces had secured a pivotal victory at Saratoga in September and October. Washington's army suffered defeats at Brandywine, Paoli, Germantown, and Pennsylvania. The rebel capital, Philadelphia, fell into British hands. By the time the army marched into Valley Forge on December 19, they were suffering not only from cold, hunger, and fatigue, but from no more in the wake of the disastrous Philadelphia campaign.
In October 1986, President Ronald Reagan signed into law the Black Revolutionary War Patriots Act, authorizing a memorial to be erected in the nation's capital in what is deemed Area 1, the National Mall and its environs. The planned memorial will honor the 5,000 enslaved and free African Americans who served the cause of the independence from 1775 to 1781. As of 2015, the planned sculpture is referred to as the National Liberty Memorial. The significant role of African Americans played in the war for independence cannot be disputed.